This is the new Ryzen 9 9950X3D, and AMD claims that it is the best processor for gamers and creators, but I can't help but think we've heard this before. Did AMD finally craft the one chip to rule them all? We're about to find out right here, right now on Robeytech. When AMD unveiled the new Ryzen 9 9900X3D and 9950X3D, we weren't terribly surprised. After all, the 3D V-Cache in their X3D chips has, well, it's just dominated in gaming performance over the past 3 generations. However, we have held on to a healthy amount of skepticism until we can see these new CPUs for ourselves, especially considering that we've heard the same message before with the Ryzen 9 7900X3D and the 7950X3D. Don't get me wrong, having a higher core count chip with extra V-Cache is cool, but it has presented a few problems. The first is that the 3D V-Cache is sensitive to heat. With the 9800X3D though, they tried something different. By flipping the design to allow the cores to be in contact with the IHS, the CPU die has better access to cooling while resting on the bed of cache, which creates a more hospitable environment for the 3D V-Cache. The second problem is that when we looked at the 7900X3D and the 7950X3D chips, the idea was great, but the outcome, well, it was a bit middling. They did all right at gaming and productivity, but only when the correct cores were parked. And the success rate of that wasn't exactly stellar, which was a bummer for all of us who do more on our PCs than gaming. And all of this left us multitaskers in a difficult place. Do we sacrifice the gaming performance increases 3D V-Cache offers, or do we sacrifice power for applications that need higher clock speeds? In other words, something is getting sacrificed, and it's always been a bitter pill to swallow, at least until today, because this chip makes some really big promises, and I'm gonna tell you up front, it does a pretty good job keeping them. But there are still some questions the 9950X3D has to answer. Is this really a CPU that can do gaming and productivity well? In gaming, how does it compare against the 9800X3D? In productivity, can we compare it with Intel's flagship CPU, or heck, even AMD's? And how does it handle creative applications? And finally, at an MSRP just shy of $700, who is this CPU really for? Fortunately, AMD provided us with a review sample so that we can answer these questions. So big thanks to AMD for sending us the 9950X3D so we can test and talk about it with you today. Okay, the first thing we need to talk about is what's changed with the 9950X3D, because if nothing has changed from the 7950X3D, we're gonna be in for a bad time here. But as we've already mentioned, AMD has made some major improvements. We already mentioned the switch in the 3D V-Cache location on the chip, but we haven't talked specifically about what that means for this processor. For starters, when we look at their specs side by side, the 9950X and the 9950X3D look nearly identical. They have the same core and thread count, same base clock speed, same max boost speed, and if I'm reading this right, the same TDP. But let's be clear, extra power in 3D V-Cache doesn't mean a thing if your CPU doesn't know when or how to use them. And this is something that, according to AMD, they have been working on updating their chipset drivers with provisioning packaging updates for both power optimization and core parking. And the second part is key for gaming performance because it doesn't matter if the V-Cache is there if the games aren't taking advantage of it. For that, the 9950X3D is still relying on the Windows Game Bar, like the previous generation, and there's still a need to manually add new games if Windows doesn't immediately acknowledge these applications as games. It's not quite as plug and play as we'd actually like. So really, this CPU's performance and value are going to depend on whether or not Windows gets all of this right and stays up to date with game releases. So at a very high level, that's a bit about what's different here. Now that we have this picture in mind, let's dive into the data because this is gonna help answer our questions. We're gonna look at a few different data sets using the Ryzen 9 9950X and the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K as comparisons. However, in gaming, we're gonna swap the 9950X for the 9800X3D to see if the 9950X3D sacrifices gaming performance here or if it can measure up against the current king of gaming CPUs. And just as a reminder, we're looking at day one numbers. So with everything we report to you, understand that there could be weird issues that someone else runs into. We could see quirks after our initial review, and there could be updates that change everything. Anything is absolutely possible. So with all that in mind, let's start with gaming. Overall, we saw the 9950X3D keep fairly close pace with the 9800X3D at both 1080p and 1440p. We look across the landscape, the 9950X3D's performance range from a fraction of a percent difference at least to about 8% at the most, with the exception of 2 titles, which we'll talk about in a second. When we look across the aisle, the 9950X3 held an overall lead above the 285K, with some exceptions in Modern Warfare 3, which was surprising, Black Myth Wukong, Indiana Jones, and Marvel Rivals. And it's those last two that we need to talk about. Our initial results for both games were weird, and we're still seeing some oddities here as well. What we discovered is that Marvel Rivals was not properly parking cores at 1440p, while Indiana Jones wasn't consistently parking cores at 1080p. However, if we were to load the game into windowed mode and switch the desktop resolution one tier up, it would park the cores like it was supposed to. Now, we did follow AMD's recommendations to manually add games into the Windows game bar, but the option was missing for us, almost like Windows was already recognizing them as games. This could get fixed in a game bar update, like the one that dropped as we were recording this video. So when it comes to gaming, you're still going to need to stay on top of the updates with the CPU, because game bar functioning properly is critical to the 9950 X3D's success. But on the plus side, these issues are far more sporadic than what we saw on the 7950 X3D. Also know that as we discovered these quirks, we reached out to AMD to make them aware of what we're actually seeing. Now that we've seen what the 9950 X3D can do in gaming, let's move on to productivity. Starting with Cinebench, the 9950 X3D performed on par with its non-X3D counterpart in multi-core performance, while also taking a solid lead over the Core Ultra 285K. That being said, the 285K did have a lead in single-core performance in Cinebench. When we look at other multi-threaded tests like CPU-Z and 3D Mark CPU profile, the 9950 X3D holds its lead over the 9950X, but doesn't quite match the 285K. However, we look at the Procyon Office productivity benchmark, the 9950 X3D puts on its suit and tie and goes to work. While it didn't make Employee of the Month when compared to the 9950X, it was close enough to be in the conversation, especially when compared to the 285K, which is no slouch here either. In other words, there really isn't much of a sacrifice in productivity at all when comparing the 9950X and 9950 X3D, but your mileage may vary if your application requires stronger multi-thread performance. But what about creator applications? If the 9950 X3D is truly the world's best CPU for gamers and creators, how does it stack up in Adobe Photoshop and Premiere? Overall, the 9950 X3D is very close to the 9950X. It trailed behind it by a little over 2% in Premiere and by a little over 3% in Photoshop. Again, not a whole lot of sacrifice here with the 9950 X3D. What about power and thermals? Does the 9950 X3D keep thermals under wraps while still drawing as much power as the 9950X? This is actually pretty interesting. When we look at thermals, the 9950 X3D held idle temperatures at 37 degrees Celsius, which was 3 degrees cooler than the 9950X, but 1 degree warmer than the 285K. The story continued under full CPU load. Here we saw the 9950 X3D hold average temperatures of 75 degrees Celsius, which was a whole 20 degrees cooler than the 9950X at 95 degrees. Meanwhile, the 9950 X3D was again 1 degree warmer than the 285K. As for gaming, the X3D averaged 61 degrees Celsius, with, you guessed it, the 9950X being warmer at 75 degrees Celsius and the Core Ultra being cooler at 56 degrees Celsius. Now, if you know how this works, temperatures are a byproduct, so this has to mean that the 9950 X3D is drawing less power than the 9950X, right? Well, that's not what we're seeing. Throughout our tests, we saw the 9950X draw power on parity with the 9950X at idle and during gameplay. But when we kicked into full CPU load tests, the 9950 X3D actually averaged 20 watts more than the 9950X while staying cooler. Now, when we look at the average power draw under full CPU load, in light of our Cinebench scores, the X3D chip had a slightly higher score, but it did require a bit more power to get there. But hey, AMD never said the 9950 X3D was the most power efficient CPU on the market. So can it do productivity and gaming well? Guys, I think AMD stuck the landing. Is it the best in each category? No, but it's great at just about everything it does with very little sacrifice for the most part. In other words, the 9950 X3D isn't a no compromise chip as much as it is a less compromised one. And I've got to be honest, this one kind of blew our collective minds here. Having a CPU that could do just about everything well has always been a niche thing that has required a ton of caveats. And there are just less and less of those with this chip, though they aren't non-existent. Minus the small hiccups, this was exactly what we wanted to see last generation, and it looks like we're getting it now. But there's still one big question left to answer. Who is the CPU for? I mean, it's $700 after all. When we look at the landscape of who would benefit the most from the 9950 X3D, we see those power users who are using their PCs for high performance gaming and content creation like streaming and recording, rendering videos, editing high resolution photos, creating 3D graphics, or compiling code. For this type of user, having a multi-purpose machine is a must, and that user now has an option that they don't have to choose between high compute power or high gaming performance, but it's not exactly a plug-and-play solution either. In a lot of ways, this CPU reminds us of NVIDIA's RTX 5090. it is pricey and it's not meant for everyone. But for those who would benefit from all it has to offer, it could be the one CPU to rule in their rig. Let's just hope that the similarities don't extend to scarcity and scalping here. Now, that being said, even if you are the type of person who we described, you need to ask yourself, would the 9950 X3D give you the right gains in the right places without sacrificing in other areas? In other words, will it help you do what you need your PC to do for you? Also, you need to ask yourself, is it enough of a jump from your current system? Listen, I wish we could test every game and every application for you, but I'm not sure there's enough coffee in the world to make that happen before launch. But we know that everyone's circumstances are different, so only you can answer the question of value. What we can tell you though, are a few things to think about if you're considering a 9950 X3D. Thing number one, are you considering 4K gaming? And if you're buying a rig at this price, maybe? While we love gaming at 4K, the performance delta between CPUs is far slimmer than it is at 1440p and 1080p. And spending more on a CPU doesn't always mean you're going to see the extra money translate into frames per second as much. That's not to say that your CPU is unimportant here though. If this is the case, and you're looking at 4K gaming, we'd recommend looking at your main creator application and allow that to dictate your CPU choice first. And this brings us to thing number two, looking at deltas and dollars. Again, look at the example from before with this piece of context. Right now, the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K retails for $600. The Ryzen 9 9950 X3D releases at $700. So you're looking at a $100 delta between the two. When you look at the performance delta between these chips, is the $100 difference worth it to you? We can't answer that for you, only you can. The one detail we wish we could throw in here is how well the untested 9900 X3D performs. At $600, its price matches the 285K better, and it still takes advantage of AMD's 3D cache and chip design. I guess we'll have to wait for another video when we actually can test this chip. At the end of the day, AMD created a solid CPU design for the ultimate multifunctional machine, and in a lot of ways, it lets you do just about anything. And that's pretty amazing. And with that, we're closing out our review of the Ryzen 9 9950 X3D. Again, we want to thank AMD for sending us the CPU for review, but it's time to know what you think. How would you use a CPU like the 9950 X3D, and what do you think about its performance in gaming, productivity, and creator applications? And if you had experience with the 7900 X3D or the 7950 X3D, what do you think about AMD's improvements for this generation? Let us know that down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, if you could slap that subscribe button with that like button and ring that notification bell so that you get a notification each and every time we post a video like this here at Robeytech or over at Robeytech Live, we would very much appreciate it. And if you want to continue the conversation about this CPU or what CPU may be right for you, head over to our Discord server. It's discord.gg/Robeytech. It's an amazing place to meet other tech and PC enthusiasts who love to have these conversations, and you know what? You might just make a friend. Also, if you could follow us at Robeytech on all the other social media platforms, that would be absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for making it all the way through the rest of this video, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.